I always thought my stability was a gift to my family, but it was just a resource they felt entitled to mine. When my brother asked me to co-sign a $55,000 loan for a truck he didn't need, I thought I was simply drawing a financial boundary. I didn't realize I was pulling the thread that would unravel decades of lies, forged signatures, and the comfortable fiction that I was loved for anything other than my credit score. My life at 33 was built on a foundation of quiet, boring mathematics. I liked it that way. I liked the predictability of my savings account growing by small, steady increments every 2 weeks. I liked the silence of my apartment on Sunday mornings, a silence that I paid for with a mortgage I qualified for entirely on my own. For years, I had been the Hayes family fixer, the one who showed up with a checkbook or a calm voice when the chaos of my parents or my brother threatened to boil over. They called me the responsible one, but the way they said it always sounded less like a compliment and more like an accusation. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing my monthly budget, when my phone buzzed against the granite. It was Jason. I felt that familiar reflexive tightening in my chest, the one that warned me a request was coming, but I answered anyway. I always answered. "Hey, Jay," I said, keeping my voice light. "What is going on? You are not going to believe this. Sarah, I am at Granite Peak Motors out in Ridgewater." His voice was vibrating with an energy I recognized instantly. It was the high of a new obsession, the same tone he had when he started day trading or when he decided he was going to breed French bulldogs. "Okay," I said slowly. "What are you doing in Ridgewater?" "I found it. Sarah. The one. It is a heavy-duty, lifted pickup, midnight black, leather interior. It has the towing package, the off-road tires, everything. It is the truck I deserve." You know how hard I've been working. I did know how hard he had been working, which was sporadically. Jason bounced between construction gigs and vague entrepreneurial ventures, always hampered by bad luck or a bad boss, never by his own choices. "That sounds nice." "Jason," I said, "but did your old car die? That piece of junk? I am done with it. Look, I am sitting in the finance office right now. The guy, Mike, he says I am perfect for this truck. We just have a small hiccup." I put my pen down. The word hiccup was doing a lot of heavy lifting. "What kind of hiccup?" I asked. "It is just the rate," he said, rushing the words. "The banks are being tight right now. The economy, you know? They are offering me something ridiculous because my credit score is still recovering from that medical bill thing last year. Mike said if I have a co-signer with solid credit, the rate drops by half. Half, Sarah. We are talking hundreds of dollars a month in savings." I closed my eyes. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in a plastic chair in a dealership cubicle, tapping his foot, already imagining himself driving off the lot. "How much is the truck?" "Jason? It is a steal. Honestly, 55,000. The number hung in the air between us. $55,000. It was more than my annual salary had been just 3 years ago. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that is a $55,000 liability. What is the interest rate without me?" "That does not matter," he snapped, his defensive walls going up instantly. "The point is, with you, it is manageable. I can make the payments. Sarah, I just landed that contract in Brookvale. I am going to be flush. I just need you to sign the paper so I can get the rate. It is literally just a signature. You do not have to pay a dime." I took a breath. I had spent the last 5 years repairing my own credit after a college mistake. I was finally in the 700s. I was saving for a single-family home, hoping to move out of my condo within the year. Co-signing a loan of that magnitude would skyrocket my debt-to-income ratio. It would anchor me to Jason's financial volatility. I cannot do it. "Jay," there was a pause, a heavy, loaded silence. "What do you mean?" "You cannot. You have the credit. I know you do. You are always bragging about your score. I never bragged. I just existed without crisis," which to them felt like boasting. "It is not about the score," I said. "I am looking to buy a house soon. If I have a $55,000 truck loan on my report, I will not qualify for a mortgage. And frankly, Jason, that is a huge amount of money. I am not asking you to pay it, he shouted. I am asking you to help your brother. If you loved me, you would do this. You know I need a reliable vehicle for work. I tried to pivot to the logic I used at my job. I tried to be the consultant, not the sister. I want you to have a reliable vehicle, I said, but we can look for something else. There are great trucks for $20,000. I can come out there. We can look at the budget together. We can figure out a plan where you qualify on your own in 6 months. Let me help you do this the right way. I do not need a financial advisor. Sarah, I need a sister. The desperation in his voice was shifting into anger. This was the cycle. Demand. Guilt. Rage. I am being a sister. I said firmly, being a good sister means not helping you get into debt you cannot handle, and it means protecting my own future. I will not co-sign. Not for $55,000. Not for a truck. The line went quiet again. But this time it felt cold. The heat of his excitement had evaporated, replaced by a jagged, icy resentment. Fine, he spat. I guess I know where I stand. Jason, please listen. Do not bother coming around if you are going to act superior, he said. The line clicked dead. I sat there in my kitchen, the silence rushing back in, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. I stared at the phone, waiting for a text back, an apology, a joke, something to signal that the temper tantrum was over. That was usually how it went. He would blow up. I would absorb it, and 20 minutes later, he would act like nothing happened. But 20 minutes passed, then an hour, then the text came. It was not an apology. Don't bother coming around if you're going to act superior. He had repeated his last words in writing, cementing them. It was a formal declaration of war. I put the phone down and exhaled. A long, shaky breath. I told myself he would cool off by tomorrow. He had to. We were family. We had Sunday dinner at Mom and Dad's house every week. This was just money. It wasn't life or death. I was wrong. The silence did not break the next morning. Usually, my mother, Linda, sent a text around 8 in the morning. A meme, a weather update, or a question about my week. Monday morning came and went. My phone remained blank. At lunch, I called my dad. Mark? He usually answered on the second ring, eager to distract himself from whatever project he was procrastinating on in the garage. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Hey, Dad. Just checking in. Jason is upset about a truck. Give me a call when you can. By Tuesday. The pattern was undeniable. I had a lunch scheduled with my Aunt Carol on Wednesday. We went to the same salad place downtown every month. I received a text from her on Tuesday night. Something came up. Busy this week. Will reach out when I can. No offer to reschedule. No emoji. Just the cold, flat administrative tone of a rejection letter. They were talking. I knew it as surely as I knew the sun would set. Jason had called Mom. Mom had called Dad. And the narrative had been set. Sarah the selfish. Sarah the snob. Sarah who thinks her money makes her better than us. I spent the rest of the week moving through a fog of anxiety. I performed my job. I went to the gym. I watered my plants. But I felt like a ghost in my own life. I checked my phone 100 times a day, waiting for the crack in the ice. It never came. By Sunday, I had a choice. I could stay home, safe in my quiet apartment, and accept the exile. Or I could go to the house, show my face, and force them to acknowledge me. I drove to my parents' house, my car, a practical 4-year-old sedan, looked small in the driveway. My dad's truck was there, and Jason's battered old sedan was parked crookedly on the lawn. He hadn't gotten the new truck. The guilt pricked at me. Sharp and immediate. I could have helped him. Maybe I should have just done it. No. I gripped the steering wheel. $55,000. That was not a favor. That was a mortgage. I had to hold the line. I walked up the front steps. I had a key, but for the first time in years, I felt like I should knock. I didn't. I unlocked the door and stepped into the smell of pot roast and onions. Hello? I called out. The chatter in the living room died instantly. I walked in. My mother was sitting on the sofa, folding napkins. My father was in his recliner, staring intently at the football game on television. Jason was on the floor, scrolling through his phone. Nobody looked up. "Hi, everyone," I said, forcing a cheerfulness I did not feel. My mother smoothed a napkin on her lap. "There is ice in the cooler if you want a drink," she said to the room at large. She didn't look at me. She looked at the wall behind me. I walked over to the cooler and grabbed a soda. My hands were shaking. I sat in the empty armchair in the corner. "So, how was everyone's week?" I asked. Jason snorted. He didn't look up from his phone, but he shook his head, a gesture of exaggerated disbelief. "Dad, did you fix that leak in the shed?" I asked, targeting the one person who usually hated conflict. My father turned the volume up on the television. "I heard you the first time." "Linda," he muttered to my mom, answering a question she hadn't asked, completely ignoring me. It was a performance. It was a coordinated, theatrical display of shunning. We were 5 minutes into my visit, and I felt like I was screaming behind soundproof glass. Dinner was announced not by an invitation, but by my mother standing up and walking to the kitchen. We all followed. I took my usual seat at the oval oak table. Jason sat across from me. Mom and Dad took the ends. The bowls of potatoes and carrots were passed around. When the bowl came to Jason, he handed it to Dad. Skipping me entirely, I had to reach across the table, my sleeve dragging in the gravy boat, to get the serving spoon. "Excuse me," I said softly. Silence. The only sound was the scrape of forks against ceramic and the chewing of meat. I looked at Jason. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. I felt a surge of pity. Maybe he really needed that truck for work. Maybe I had ruined a big break for him. "Jason," I said, "I know you are mad." He dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the plate. He looked at Mom. "Is someone speaking?" he asked, because I thought we agreed that family supports family. And since I do not see any family support here, I must be hearing things. "Jason, stop it," I said, my voice rising. "I am right here. I am not going to co-sign a loan that destroys my credit. That is not reasonable." My mother slammed her hand on the table. It wasn't a hard slam, but the shock of it made me jump. "We are eating." "Sarah," she hissed, "do not bring your drama to my dinner table." "My drama?" I stared at her. "I have been sitting here for 20 minutes while you all pretend I'm invisible." "Jason asked me for $55,000. I said no. That is not drama. That is boundaries. You always have to make it about the money." My father grumbled into his potatoes. "You count every penny. You think everyone is out to get you. I'm trying to buy a house." "Dad," I said, "I cannot carry his debt." My mother stood up abruptly. "I forgot the rolls," she said. She walked to the mantel above the fake fireplace to grab the basket of bread she had left there. As she did, she paused. There was a silver picture frame on the mantel. It usually held a photo of the 4 of us from my college graduation, the last time we were all genuinely happy. She picked up the frame, dusted it with her sleeve, and set it back down. But she didn't just set it down, she swapped it. She moved the graduation photo to the back. Behind a vase, in its place, she set up a new framed photo. I squinted at it. It was a picture taken 3 weeks ago at my cousin's barbecue. I had been working that weekend, stuck on a deadline. In the photo, my parents and Jason were standing with their arms around each other, laughing. They looked like a unit, a closed circle. My mother adjusted the angle of the frame so it faced directly out into the room. It was a shrine to a version of the family that didn't include me. She brought the rolls to the table and sat down. I looked at the photo, then at my mother. She was buttering a roll with precise, angry movements. "You replaced the picture," I said. "It is just a nice photo." "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence, "why does everything have to be a hidden meaning with you?" It wasn't a hidden meaning. It was a billboard. I lost my appetite. The roast tasted like ash. I put my fork down. I realized then that I wasn't just in the penalty box. I was being erased. They were rewriting the narrative of the Hayes family in real time, editing me out because I had finally said the word no. I looked at Jason. He was eating with gusto now, smirking slightly as he chewed. He was enjoying this. He wasn't devastated by the lack of a truck. He was empowered by the rallying of the troops. He had weaponized his victimhood, and my parents had happily supplied the ammunition. I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly on the linoleum. I am going to go, I said. Nobody said stay. Nobody said goodbye. I walked to the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As I reached for the handle, my father spoke. He didn't turn around. If you change your mind, you know where to find us, but don't come back until you remember what family means. I walked out. I got into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there in the dark driveway. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a cold, hard clarity started to settle in my stomach. I drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past me. When I got into my apartment, the quiet wasn't oppressive anymore. It felt protective. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my desk. I thought about the last 10 years. I thought about the time Jason borrowed $2,000 for a security deposit on an apartment he got evicted from 3 months later. I never saw that money again. I thought about the time my dad used my credit card to buy materials for a deck job, promising to pay me back when the client paid him. He paid me back 6 months later, minus the interest charges I had eaten. I thought about the time my mom guilted me into paying for the family vacation to Florida because you have that good job and we just want to be together. I paid for the rental house. Jason brought a girlfriend who smoked in the bedroom and I lost my deposit. It wasn't just the truck. The truck was just the object that was too big to swallow. They didn't want me. They wanted my utility. They wanted the frictionless life my solvency provided them. And the moment I became friction, I was discarded. I looked at the blank screen of my laptop. Don't come back until you remember what family means. That was the threat. They were betting on my loneliness. They knew I hated conflict. They knew I valued harmony. They were betting that give it a week, maybe 2, and I would crumble. I would call Jason, apologize for being selfish, and sign the papers just to get my seat back at the table. They were betting on the old Sarah. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I clicked a black pen. I wasn't going to apologize, and I wasn't going to let them gaslight me into thinking I was the villain for refusing to sign a $55,000 death warrant for my credit. I opened the notebook to the first page. At the top, I wrote the date. Then I wrote, "Conversation with Jason regarding truck loan." I wrote down the details. The dealership name, Granite Peak Motors. The town, Ridgewater. The amount, $55,000. I wrote down the threats. If you loved me, you'd do this. I wrote down the text message. Don't bother coming around if you're going to act superior. I cataloged the silent treatment, the dates and times of my unreturned calls to Mom and Dad. It felt petty at first, like I was keeping a diary of grievances, but as the ink filled the page, it felt like armor. If they were going to tell everyone I was cruel, I was going to have the receipts to prove I was just sane. I didn't know then how much I would need that notebook. I didn't know that the silence wasn't just a punishment. It was a distraction. I didn't know that while I was crying over a photograph on a mantel, the real betrayal was already happening in a back office in Ridgewater. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I was alone. And for the first time, I was going to write my own version of the story. I closed the notebook, I turned off my phone, and I went to sleep. 3 days after I walked out of my parents' house, I tried to fix it. That was the reflex I could not seem to amputate. The desperate, childish need to smooth things over, to be the water that put out the fire. Even if I was the one getting burned, I sent a group text to my mom and dad. I left Jason off of it, thinking that without his volatile energy in the room, I might be able to make them hear me. Meet me for coffee at Meadow and Main. Saturday at 10. My treat. I just want to talk. It was a peace offering. Meadow and Main was my mother's favorite spot. A bright, overpriced cafe with reclaimed wood tables and lavender-infused lattes she claimed were the only thing that helped her migraines. Inviting them there was a signal. I am still your daughter. I still know what you like, and I am willing to pay for it. I arrived at 9:45. I secured a table by the window, the one with the good light. and I waited. At 10 o'clock, the cafe was bustling, the line for pastries wrapped around the counter. I watched the door. Every time the bell chimed, my stomach jumped. At 10:15, I ordered 2 coffees and a scone, just in case they were running late. My dad was chronically punctual, but my mom liked to make an entrance. I told myself they were just stuck in traffic on the interstate. At 10:30, the coffees were lukewarm. I checked my phone. No new messages. At 10:45, the waitress came over. She was young, maybe 20, with a kind smile that made me feel pathetic. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked. "Or should I clear those?" She gestured to the 2 untouched cups across from me. I checked my phone one last time. "They're coming." I wanted to say, they wouldn't just leave me sitting here, but they would. They were... "No," I said, my voice sounding thin and brittle in my own ears. "You can clear them. I guess they are not coming." I sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at the empty chairs. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a tactical maneuver. They knew I would be here. They knew I would wait. They wanted me to sit in this public place, surrounded by happy families and friends catching up, and feel the specific weight of my own isolation. I walked to my car, heavy with a shame I hadn't earned. As I turned the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "We're disappointed." That was it. 2 words. No explanation. No apology for standing me up. No acknowledgement of the effort I had made. Just the verdict. Disappointed. It was the ultimate parental weapon. Heavier than anger. Sharper than insults. It implied that I had failed a moral test. I drove home in silence, the word bouncing around my skull. By Sunday, the private silence had metastasized into public noise. I was scrolling through social media, a bad habit when I was anxious, when I saw Jason's post. He hadn't tagged me. He was too savvy for that, but he had crafted it to land exactly where it would hurt. It was a picture of him and my dad standing by my dad's old truck, looking gritty and hardworking. The caption read, "Funny how money changes people. You think you know who has your back, but the second they get a little comfort, they forget where they came from." Family is about sacrifice, not keeping score. Real ones know. It had 30 likes. My aunt had commented a string of praying hand emojis. My cousin reacted with a heart. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment crawl up my neck. Forget where they came from? I hadn't forgotten. I remembered exactly where I came from. I came from the same house with the leaky roof and the drafty windows. The difference was that I had worked 60-hour weeks for a decade to ensure I didn't have to stay there, while Jason had spent his 20s chasing get-rich-quick schemes and quitting jobs the moment a manager asked him to show up on time. Then the direct messages started. The first one was from Mrs. Gable, a neighbor who had watched us grow up. She was a sweet woman, the kind who baked cookies for Christmas and knit blankets for babies. "Sarah, honey," she wrote, "I saw Jason's post. Is everything okay? Your mom sounded absolutely heartbroken when I saw her at the grocery store. I hope you guys can work it out. Life is too short to let promises be broken." I stopped. I reread the last sentence. "Life is too short to let promises be broken." I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. "What do you mean, promises?" She replied instantly. "Oh, just... Linda mentioned you had promised to help Jason with his work truck and then backed out at the last minute. She said he might lose a big contract because of it. I know it's none of my business, but they are just so worried." The air left my lungs. So that was the narrative. They weren't telling people I refused to co-sign a $55,000 loan for a luxury pickup. They were telling people I had promised to help, implying I had agreed to it, and then pulled the rug out. Endangering Jason's livelihood, they had turned my responsible boundary into a character flaw. In their version of the story, I wasn't the prudent sister. I was the flaky, cruel traitor who had lied. It was brilliant, really. It made them the victims of my capriciousness, rather than the aggressors against my financial safety. It explained their anger to the world in a way that made them look reasonable. I put the phone down. I felt sick. I wanted to scream, to post a screenshot of the loan terms, to broadcast the truth to everyone in our small hometown. But I knew how that would look. It would look defensive. It would look like I was attacking my heartbroken mother. I went to work on Monday feeling like I was wearing a skin that didn't fit. I sat at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, but the numbers kept swimming. Tessa, the senior analyst in the cubicle next to mine, rolled her chair over around 11. Tessa was sharp, unsentimental, and had survived a divorce that would have leveled a lesser woman. She was the only person at work I had told about the truck situation. "You look like you haven't slept in 3 days," she said, leaning her elbow on my desk. I rubbed my temples. "I haven't. They stood me up. Tessa. And now they are telling people I promised to help and reneged. Mrs. Gable messaged me. They are painting me as the villain." Tessa didn't look surprised. She spun a pen between her fingers. "Of course they are," she said. "That is how the system protects itself." "What system?" I asked. "The family system," she said. "Sarah, listen to me. You changed the rules. For years, you have been the fixer. You are the safety net. When the safety net says no, the people on the tightrope do not just say okay, they panic. They have to make you the bad guy because if you are not the bad guy, then they are just irresponsible adults trying to mooch off their daughter, and they cannot face that reality." She paused, looking at me with a softness that was rare for her. "They punish boundaries. Sarah, that is the pattern. If they make the price of saying no high enough, the guilt, the shunning, the public shame, they figure you will eventually fold just to make the pain stop." I felt a lump form in my throat. Is that what is happening? Am I being hazed? "Basically," Tessa said. "The question is, are you going to pay the ransom? Because if you sign that loan now to make them stop, they will know exactly what it takes to break you, and the next time, the ask will be bigger." I looked at her. $55,000 was already pretty big. "It is not about the money," she said. "It is about control. You are proving you are separate from them. That terrifies them." I felt embarrassed. Hearing it laid out so clinically, I felt like a child who had been throwing a tantrum over nothing, but at the same time, the embarrassment was washed over by a wave of relief. I am not crazy. That was what I needed to hear. I am not crazy. I went home that evening with Tessa's words rattling in my head. They punish boundaries. I walked into my apartment building and checked the mail. It was mostly junk. Grocery store flyers, a pre-approved credit card offer, a catalog. But there was one envelope that stood out. It was from Harborstone Credit. I frowned. I didn't bank with Harborstone. My accounts were with a national bank, and my car loan was through a different credit union. I carried the mail upstairs, tossed my keys on the counter, and tore open the envelope. It was a standard form letter. "Dear Sarah Hayes, thank you for your recent inquiry. We are reviewing your application and will notify you of our decision shortly. If you did not authorize this inquiry, please contact us immediately." I stared at the paper. Recent inquiry. I hadn't applied for anything. I was in strict savings mode for the house. I hadn't even applied for a store credit card in 2 years. My first thought was that it was a mistake, a glitch. Maybe someone with a similar name had applied and the files got crossed. It happened. But then my phone chimed. It was an alert from my credit monitoring app. I had installed it years ago when I started rebuilding my score, and I usually ignored the weekly updates. New alert. Hard inquiry detected on your Equifax report. My stomach dropped. A hard inquiry wasn't a glitch. A hard inquiry meant someone had submitted a formal application for credit using my social security number, date of birth, and address. I sat down at my kitchen table, still in my coat. I opened my laptop and logged into the credit monitoring site. My fingers were cold. I pulled up the report. There it was. Date, October 14th. Creditor, Granite Peak Motors / Harborstone Credit. Type, hard inquiry. I looked at the date again. October 14th. Jason had called me on Monday. October 13th. The fight had happened that afternoon. He had hung up on me. This inquiry was dated Tuesday morning, the morning after I said no. The morning the silent treatment began. The room seemed to tilt. I felt a physical wave of nausea. They didn't just get mad. I whispered to the empty room. They ran it anyway. But how? They needed my social security number. I had never given it to Jason. I was careful. Then I remembered. 2 years ago, when I helped my parents refinance their house to pay off some medical bills. I had been involved in the paperwork. I had sat at their dining room table with my laptop. My tax returns were there. My W-2s. My mother kept a filing cabinet in the hallway. The family files. She called it. It was a chaotic mess of birth certificates, old report cards, and warranties for appliances they didn't own anymore. My social security number was in that cabinet, on old college financial aid forms, on the copies of the refinance documents. They had my file. My mind raced, trying to find a benign explanation. Maybe they just checked to see if I could help? Maybe they misunderstood? No, you cannot run a hard credit check without a signature or explicit verbal consent. It is illegal. It is fraud. I picked up my phone. I needed to know. I dialed the number for Granite Peak Motors. I had written it down in my notebook. Granite Peak Motors. Sales. This is Dave. Hi, I said, my voice shaking. I need to speak to the finance department. Please. Hold on. The line clicked and bad jazz music played for 2 minutes. I paced my kitchen. Breathe. I told myself. Get facts. Finance. This is Mike. Mike. That was the name Jason had mentioned. Mike said I'm perfect for this truck. Hi, Mike. My name is Sarah Hayes. I am calling because I just received a notice of a hard inquiry on my credit report from your dealership. Dated last Tuesday. There was a pause, the sound of typing on a keyboard. Hayes. Hayes. Okay. Yeah. I see it here. For the 24 Silverado? Yes. I said, but here's the thing. Mike, I did not apply for a Silverado. I was not at your dealership on Tuesday. I have never been to your dealership. The typing stopped. Okay. Well, looking at the file here, you are listed as the co-applicant. Co-applicant. I repeated. Who is the primary applicant? Jason Hayes. I closed my eyes. Hearing it out loud made it real. It wasn't a mistake. It was Jason. Okay, I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. Mike, I did not authorize that application. I refused to co-sign that loan. How did you run my credit without my signature? Well, ma'am, we have a signed authorization form here. You have a signed form? I asked. With my signature? Yes, ma'am. Electronic signature, and the primary applicant provided the personal identifying information. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Electronic signature. That meant someone had clicked a box saying they were me, or someone had scribbled my name on an iPad. Mike, I said, I need you to send me a copy of that authorization form immediately. I cannot do that, he said, his tone shifting from helpful to guarded. Why not? It is my name. It is my credit. It is a joint application. And Jason Hayes is the primary. Due to privacy regulations, I can only release documents to the primary applicant. Are you joking? I asked, my voice rising. You just told me you ran my credit. You used my identity. And now you are telling me you cannot show me the proof because of privacy? Look, Ms. Hayes, if there is a misunderstanding between you and your brother, you need to work that out with him. We just processed the paperwork we are given. If he said you were co-signing, and he gave us the info, he did not just give you the info, I snapped. He stole it. And you ran it without verifying I was present. Did you speak to me? Did you see my ID? Ma'am, we do a lot of remote deals. It is standard practice. It is identity theft. Mike, silence on the other end. I want that application withdrawn. I said, and I want the inquiry removed from my report. You would have to take that up with the bureaus for the removal, he said, sounding bored now. And I cannot withdraw the application without the primary's consent. It is already in underwriting. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red button and threw the phone onto the couch. I stood in the center of my living room, my hands clenched into fists. The silence of the last week suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. They weren't just punishing me. They were stalling me. They knew if I found out, I would stop it. So they cut me off. They ghosted me. They created a narrative that I was unreliable, so that if the dealership called to verify anything, or if the bank reached out, they could say, "Oh, Sarah is just being difficult. She promised she would do this." They were icing me out while simultaneously wearing my skin to the bank. I felt a wave of grief so profound it nearly buckled my knees. This wasn't just Jason being reckless. This was a conspiracy. My parents knew. They had to know. Jason couldn't have gotten my social security number without them. They had handed him the file. They had sat there, likely at the same dinner table where they ignored me, and helped him fill out the forms using my name. Were disappointed. The audacity of that text message hit me like a physical blow. They were disappointed? They were committing a felony. I walked to the window and looked out at the streetlights. I wanted to drive over there. I wanted to kick down the door and scream at them until they admitted it. I wanted to grab Jason by the collar. But I heard Tessa's voice. They punish boundaries. If I went over there screaming, I would just be the crazy sister again. I would be the drama queen. They would gaslight me. They would say, "We were just trying to get the process started. We knew you would come around. Why do you have to be so legalistic about everything?" They would make me the villain for catching them. I turned away from the window. I wasn't going to go over there. Not yet. I went back to my laptop. I logged into Experian. I logged into TransUnion. I logged into Equifax. My hands were steady now. It was a cold, mechanical steadiness. I clicked the button. Place fraud alert. I clicked the next button. Freeze credit file. I entered a PIN. I confirmed my identity. Your credit file is now frozen. No new creditors can access your report. It was a practical step. It was the responsible thing to do. But as I clicked confirm, it felt like I was filing divorce papers. Freezing my credit meant blocking my family. It meant that when they tried to finalize that loan, and they would try, the door would be slammed in their faces, not by me, but by the system. I opened a new document on my computer. I named it Timeline of Events. I typed, October 14th, unauthorized, hard inquiry from Granite Peak Motors. I typed, October 21st, phone call with Mike, Finance Department, confirmed application submitted with Jason as primary. Confirmed they have a signed authorization I did not sign. I was building a case. I was gathering evidence. I looked at the cursor blinking on the white screen. It looked lonely. I realized then that the silence wasn't going to end. It was going to get louder. When that loan got denied, when the dealership called Jason and told him the co-signer's credit was frozen and the application was flagged for potential fraud, the war was going to move from the cold phase to the hot phase. I sat there in the glow of the monitor, tears finally spilling over my cheeks. I wasn't crying for my credit score. I wasn't crying for the money. I was crying because I had just realized that to save my future, I had to report my own brother as a thief, and I knew, with a devastating certainty, that my parents would never forgive me for it. I wiped my face. I saved the document. I was ready. The silence broke on a Thursday evening, not with a bang, but with a text message that popped up while I was washing dishes. It was from my mother. "Can you come over tomorrow night? We want to talk. Just family." I stared at the screen, my hands dripping soapy water onto the floor. For 10 days, I had been a ghost to them. I had been blocked, ignored, and talked about in hushed, pitying tones to the neighbors. Now, suddenly, an invitation. My heart did a traitorous little leap. The part of me that was still a little girl, the part that just wanted her mom to look at her with approval, thought, "They are ready to apologize." I convinced myself that the credit freeze had worked. I thought that by stopping the mechanism of the loan, I had forced them to see reality. I thought they were finally ready to sit down, admit the truck was a bad idea, and go back to being a family. I was naive. I see that now. I mistook a tactical retreat for a surrender. I replied, "Okay, I will be there at 7. I arrived at the house at 6:55. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the lawn that Jason refused to mow. My dad's truck was there, Jason's car was there, and there was a third car, a beige Buick that I recognized. It belonged to Ray Miller. Ray was a longtime friend of my father's, a guy who ran a small insurance office in town. We called him Uncle Ray growing up, though there was no blood relation. He was the kind of guy who always had a joke and a pocket full of hard candies. I frowned. Just family, the text had said. I walked up the steps and opened the door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Hello?" I called out. "In the living room." They were waiting. It looked like an intervention, or a wake. My mother was on the sofa, clutching a tissue. My father stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed tight against his chest. Jason was sitting in the recliner, bouncing his leg nervously, and Ray Miller was sitting at the coffee table. In front of him was a leather portfolio and his notary stamp. The sight of that stamp hit me like a physical shove. "Sarah," Ray said, smiling that genial, insurance salesman smile. "Good to see you, kiddo." "Hi, Ray," I said, not moving from the entryway. I thought this was a family talk. "It is," my mother said. She patted the cushion beside her. "Come sit down. Sarah, please, we just want to fix this." I didn't sit. I stayed standing, keeping the distance between us. "Fix what, Mom?" "The misunderstanding," she said. "We know you were worried about the loan. We know you're trying to buy a house. We get it." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "You do?" "Of course," Jason said. He sounded magnanimous, like he was forgiving me. "We do not want to mess up your credit. Sarah, we found a workaround." "A workaround?" I asked. Ray cleared his throat. He tapped a document sitting on the table. It was a single sheet of paper, dense with text. "Your dad explained the situation," Ray said. "Since you are worried about the debt-to-income ratio for your mortgage, we structured this differently. This is just a character reference and familial support affidavit. It basically tells the bank that the family supports the purchase, but it is not a direct loan application. It is just administrative, to help Jason's file look a little thicker." I looked at Ray, then at my father. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the carpet. "So," I said slowly, "you want me to sign a character reference?" "Exactly," my mother said, beaming now, "just to show we are united. Ray is here to notarize it so it looks official for the bank. Then we can put all this ugliness behind us and have some pie." I made apple. It sounded so easy. Just a signature. Just a piece of paper to make my brother look good. Then pie. Then love. Then forgiveness. "Can I read it?" I asked. Jason's legs stopped bouncing. "You do not trust us?" "I just want to read it." "Jason." I walked over to the table and picked up the paper. Ray shifted in his seat, looking a little uncomfortable. I scanned the document. It was titled Affidavit of Support. The first paragraph was fluff, standard language about Jason's employment. Then I got to the third paragraph. "The undersigned acknowledges their role as guarantor regarding the asset described in Schedule A and agrees to assume liability for any default events as defined by the lender." My blood ran cold. Guarantor. I looked up. "This is a co-signer agreement." I said. "No, it isn't." My father snapped. "It is an affidavit. It says so at the top." "Dad," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "It uses the word guarantor. That means if he does not pay, I pay. This is a legal assumption of debt. You just changed the title at the top. It is a formality," Jason shouted. Standing up, "The bank just needs to see the word guarantor to release the rate. They are never going to come after you. I am paying the truck." "Then why do you need me to sign a legal document saying I will pay it?" I asked. "Because we are a family," my mother cried out, tears instantly appearing in her eyes. "Sarah, why do you have to be so difficult? Why do you have to examine every little thing? Ray drove all the way out here to help us." I looked at Ray. He was a notary. He knew exactly what this was. He was hoping I was too stupid or too intimidated to read the fine print. "You knew," I said to Ray. "You were going to notarize a guarantee disguised as a character reference." Ray shrugged, closing his portfolio. "Look, Sarah, Mark told me you guys had an agreement and you just needed the paperwork done. I am not a lawyer. I just stamp signatures." I dropped the paper back onto the table. It fluttered down. landing next to the pie my mother had promised. I am not signing it, I said. My father took a step toward me. His face was red. Just sign the damn paper. Sarah, he yelled. His voice boomed in the small living room. You always make things complicated. You always have to be the smartest person in the room. Your brother needs this. We need this. I do not make things complicated. Dad, I said, backing away toward the door. I make them real. You are trying to trick me into $55,000 of debt. That is not complicated. That is lying. I am not lying, he roared. I am trying to help my son. By feeding your daughter to the bank? I asked. Get out, Jason said. His voice was low and venomous. Just get out. I turned and walked to the door. My hands were fumbling for the knob. I felt like the walls were closing in, like the house itself was trying to digest me. I stepped out into the cool night air. I heard my mother sobbing loudly inside. I heard my father cursing. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove 2 blocks before I had to pull over. I parked under a streetlight and shook. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I was terrified. They had planned it. They had called Ray. They had typed up a fake document. They had invited me over with the promise of reconciliation, all to ambush me into signing away my financial future. They didn't want me. They wanted my autograph. I sat there for 20 minutes, until my heart rate slowed down enough to drive. I went home, double-locked my door, and sat in the dark. The next morning, I was at work, trying to focus on a spreadsheet, when my cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. With a local area code, I almost didn't answer, but a nagging instinct told me I had to. Hello? Ms. Hayes? This is Brenda Vance from Harborstone Credit. My stomach dropped. I stood up and walked out of the open plan office into the hallway. Yes, this is Sarah. Hi, Ms. Hayes. I am the loan officer processing the vehicle financing for Jason Hayes. I am just calling to verify a few details on the co-signer consent form before we finalize the funding. I leaned against the wall. The cold plaster felt good against my burning cheek. Ms. Vance, I said. I did not sign a consent form. I told the dealership that last week. I have a fraud alert on my credit file. Did you not see it? We saw the alert, Brenda said. Her voice was professional, but confused. That is why I'm calling. We received an electronically signed consent from you yesterday evening, time-stamped at 7:14 p.m. Since the fraud alert requires verbal verification for any new activity, I just need you to confirm that was you. I looked at my watch. 7:14 p.m., yesterday at 7:14 p.m. I was standing in my parents' living room. I was arguing with my father. I was looking at Ray Miller. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost dropped the phone. Jason had been on his phone. I remembered him sitting in the recliner, bouncing his leg, tapping away. They had me there. They had me in the room. Ms. Vance, I said, my voice sounding distant. I was physically present with the applicant at 7:14 p.m., but I did not sign anything. I refused to sign. There was a long pause on the line. Okay, Brenda said slowly. So you are stating that the electronic signature we received is invalid? I am stating that I did not authorize it. I did not click consent. I did not sign. Okay. I will note that in the file. The application is suspended pending investigation. She hung up. I stood in the hallway, staring at the gray carpet. They had used my presence. They knew the bank might track the location of the device, or that the timestamp would need to match a time when I could plausibly be with Jason. They invited me over to create the alibi for the forgery. Come over. We want to talk. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a geolocation strategy. I went back to my desk, packed my bag, and told my boss I had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie. My family was the emergency. I didn't go to the police station. Not yet. I went to a generic office park on the north side of town, to a suite listed as Elaine Porter, consumer protection attorney. I had found her online the night before, in a moment of panic. Her reviews said she was tough and unemotional. That was what I needed. Elaine was a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a haircut that meant business. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. I told her everything: the truck, the refusal, the silent treatment, the credit inquiry, the ambush, and the phone call from Brenda Vance. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Sarah," she said. Her voice was dry and gravelly. "You need to stop thinking of this as a family dispute. This is not a family dispute. This is a financial crime in progress." "I know," I whispered, "but they are my parents. That is the only reason they have gotten this far." She said, "If a stranger did this, if a stranger stole your social security number, forged your signature, and lured you to a location to establish an alibi, you would not be sitting here asking me what to do. You would be pressing charges." I shifted in my chair. "I do not want to put my brother in jail. Elaine, I just want out of the loan." Elaine sighed. She opened a notepad. "Here is the reality. The bank does not care about your family dynamics. They care about the contract. Right now, there is a document in their system that says you owe them $55,000. To get your name off that, you have to prove it is a forgery. And to prove it is a forgery, you usually have to file a police report for identity theft. Is there another way?" I asked. Elaine tapped her pen on the desk. "We can try the administrative route first. We create a paper trail so thick they cannot breathe without inhaling your denial." She started writing a list. "Number 1, she said, you send a formal dispute letter to Harborstone Credit via certified mail. You demand a copy of the electronic signature audit trail, the IP address, the device ID, the timestamp. Number 2, you send a letter to Granite Peak Motors. You inform them that any use of your identity is unauthorized and that you will hold them liable for damages if they proceed. Number 3, she looked up at me. You send a letter to your brother and your parents. To my parents? Yes. A cease and desist. It tells them that you are aware of the fraudulent activity and that any further attempts to use your personal information will result in immediate legal action." I felt a lump in my throat. Sending a legal threat to my mom and dad, it felt like matricide. "If you do not do this, Sarah," Elaine said softly, "they will do it again. They almost got away with it yesterday. Next time, they might wait until you are on vacation so they can use your IP address. Or they might open a credit card you do not check. They have shown you who they are. You need to believe them." I wrote the check for her retainer. It was expensive, but it felt like buying a shield. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the post office. I sent the letters, certified mail, return receipt requested. The green slips of paper felt heavy in my hand. They were declarations of independence. I didn't call my family. I didn't text. I just went home and waited. The backlash took 2 days. It arrived on Saturday morning, not as a text, but as a voicemail. My phone had been on Do Not Disturb. I saw the notification. Voicemail from Mom. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed play. "Sarah, I just got a letter from a lawyer. Are you kidding me? A cease and desist? To your own mother?" Her voice was high and ragged. "We were just trying to help your brother. He's going to lose that truck. Sarah, he is going to lose his job because he doesn't have a reliable vehicle. And it is going to be your fault. You are trying to ruin his life. I hope you are happy with your precious credit score, because you do not have a family anymore. Do not call us." The message ended. I sat there, the silence of the room pressing in on me. Trying to ruin his life. That was the line that snapped the last tether. For weeks, I had been twisting myself into knots trying to understand them. I had told myself they were desperate. I had told myself they were financially illiterate. I had told myself they loved me, but they were just confused. But the voicemail wasn't confused. It was calculated. They were framing me. They were rewriting reality so that I was the aggressor, in their story. I wasn't the victim of fraud. I was the malicious sister who sent lawyers to attack her poor, struggling family. They were using my boundaries as proof of my cruelty. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at myself. I looked tired, but I also looked different. The fear was gone. The fear had come from the uncertainty, from the hope that I could fix it without hurting anyone, but the hurt had already happened. They had done it. I realized then that I couldn't explain myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I couldn't get empathy from people who viewed me as an asset, not a person. I stopped trying to figure out what I could say to make them understand. I stopped drafting mental apologies. I went to my desk. I opened my notebook. I wrote down the details of the voicemail. October 25th, 10:14 a.m., voicemail from Linda Hayes. Acknowledging receipt of cease and desist. Admitted intent to proceed with loan despite refusal. It was just data now. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a witness. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I drank it standing up. Looking out the window at the gray autumn sky. I was alone. The silence from the family was absolute now. But for the first time. The silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like safety. I checked my email. There was a notification from Experian. Credit file update. Dispute filed. I took a sip of coffee. Let them be disappointed. Let them tell the neighbors I was a monster. Let them post on Facebook. I had the receipts. And for the first time in my life, I was going to keep them for myself. The envelope from Harborstone Credit arrived on a Tuesday, landing in my mailbox with a deceptively light thud. It was a standard 9x12 manila envelope, the kind that usually holds insurance policies or tax returns. But as I picked it up, I felt the specific gravity of it. This was not paperwork. It was the smoking gun. I did not open it in the lobby. I carried it upstairs to my apartment, placed it on my dining table, and sat down. I used a letter opener to slice the top edge, my movements precise and slow, like a surgeon preparing to make an incision. Inside was a stack of papers clipped together. On top was a cover letter from the fraud department, referencing my dispute and the enclosed documentation provided by the applicant. I turned the page. There it was. Co-signer agreement and guarantee. My name, Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, was typed in the borrower field. My current address was there. My social security number was there. My annual income, rounded up slightly but accurate enough to be convincing, was listed in the employment section. And at the bottom, there was a signature. I stared at it. I brought the paper closer to my face, squinting under the kitchen light. It said Sarah Hayes. It looked like my signature. It had the same general architecture, the large, looping S, the sharp H. To a stranger, to a loan officer glancing at it for 3 seconds before stamping approved. It would pass without question, but I knew my hand. I knew the muscle memory of writing my own name thousands of times. I looked at the slant. My natural handwriting leaned slightly to the right, a habit from strict cursive lessons in 3rd grade. This signature stood upright, almost rigid. I looked at the lowercase a. When I write an A, I close the loop completely. In this signature, the loop was left open at the top, just a tiny gap, like a mouth gasping for air. And then I saw the tell, the definitive proof. When I signed my last name, I crossed the H in the middle, a straight horizontal line, but this signature had a slight upward tick at the end of the crossbar. It was a flourish, a tiny, artistic affectation. It was how my mother wrote her H. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. I closed my eyes and pictured her sitting at the dining room table, pen in hand, practicing on a scrap of paper before committing it to the form. Or maybe she hadn't needed to practice. Maybe she had signed my name on school permission slips enough times when I was a child that she thought she owned the rights to it. I packed the papers back into the envelope. My hands were cold. I drove to Elaine Porter's office. I didn't call ahead. She saw me within 10 minutes. I laid the document on her desk and pointed to the signature. "It is not me," I said. "The slant is wrong. The spacing is wrong. And that H, that is my mother's handwriting." Elaine put on her reading glasses and examined it. She compared it to the retainer agreement I had signed the week before. She nodded slowly. "It is a skilled forgery," she said. "But it is a forgery. This, combined with the timestamp placing you at their house during the electronic submission, is enough." "Enough for what?" I asked. "Enough to treat this as criminal identity theft." She said, "Sarah, you have the proof. Now you have to file the report." I knew this moment was coming, but the reality of it felt like swallowing glass. Filing a report meant walking into a police station and formally accusing my family of a crime. It meant creating a public record that would exist forever. "Do I have to?" I asked, my voice small. "If you want the debt removed." "Yes," Elaine said. "The bank will not release you based on your word. They need a police report number. They need to know you are willing to testify that this wasn't you. It is the only way to compel them to vacate the loan." I drove to the precinct. It wasn't like the movies. It wasn't raining, and there was no dramatic music. It was just a bright, overcast Tuesday afternoon. The station lobby smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. I took a number. I waited on a hard plastic bench between a guy who looked like he had been in a fight and a woman reporting a stolen purse. When my number was called, I walked up to the high desk. The officer was a heavy-set man with tired eyes. "I need to file an identity theft report," I said. He slid a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out." I took the pen. Name of suspect. My hand hovered over the line. I could write unknown. I could pretend I didn't know who did it. But if I wrote unknown, the investigation would stall. The bank might claim I was covering for someone, which makes me liable. Elaine had been clear about that. If you protect them, you adopt the debt. I wrote, Jason Hayes, Linda Hayes, Mark Hayes. I wrote down the address of the house I grew up in. I filled out the narrative section. Unlawful use of personal information to obtain vehicle financing, forged signature on guarantor agreement. I handed the clipboard back. The officer typed the information into his computer. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look sympathetic. He just looked bored. "Here is your case number," he said, tearing off a slip of paper. "A detective will be assigned within 5 business days." I took the paper. It was flimsy, printed on thermal receipt paper. It weighed nothing, yet it felt like I was holding a grenade that I had just pulled the pin on. I walked out to my car and sat there for a long time. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel powerful. I felt a heavy, dull ache in my chest, a profound sadness that this was what it had come to. I had just reported my mother to the police, the woman who taught me to tie my shoes, the woman who made apple pie to cover up a felony. I pulled out my phone. I needed to tell them. I wasn't going to let them find out when a detective knocked on their door. That felt too cruel, even for this. I opened the group chat, the one that had been silent since the disappointed text. I just left the police station. I typed, "I have filed a formal identity theft report regarding the Harborstone loan application. I have the documents with the forged signature. I know it wasn't me." I paused, my thumb hovering over the send button. I needed to be clear. I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because I will not be liable for a debt I did not agree to. I am done discussing feelings. I just want the truth. Please do not contact me unless you are ready to admit what happened. I sent it. I put the phone on the passenger seat and started the car. The response came before I had even left the parking lot. It wasn't from the group. It was from Jason. A direct text. "How dare you call me a criminal?" I stared at the words. He didn't say I didn't do it. He didn't say, "You're crazy." He didn't say it's a mistake. He said, "How dare you call me a criminal?" It was the outrage of the entitled. He was furious not because he was innocent, but because I had used the correct label for his actions. He wanted the money, but he didn't want the noun that went with the method he used to get it. He wanted to be a scrappy entrepreneur finding a workaround, not a felon. I didn't reply. I drove home. The next day, the mail brought the second blow. It was a small envelope, standard business size, from Brookvale Community Bank. I frowned. I had never been to Brookvale. It was a small town about 40 minutes east of us, a place known for its antique shops and a minor league baseball field. I had no business there. I opened it. Notice of past due payment. Dear Sarah Hayes, this is a reminder that your payment of $212 was due on October 15th. Your loan is now 10 days past due. Please remit payment immediately to avoid reporting to credit bureaus. I read it twice. A loan? I called the number on the letterhead. Brookvale Community Bank. Loan Department. Hi, I said, I just received a past due notice, but I do not have a loan with you. Name and account number? I gave it to her. Okay. Ms. Hayes. Yes. This is for the personal unsecured loan opened in August of 2022. 2022? That was 2 years ago. Yes. The original balance was $4,000. It has been paid steadily until this month. I felt the room spin. $4,000. 2 years ago. What was the loan for? I asked. It was a personal loan, the clerk said. But looking at the disbursement notes, it looks like the check was made out to Distinct Auto Recovery. Distinct Auto Recovery. That was a repo agency. I closed my eyes. 2 years ago. Jason had a Ford Explorer. He told us he sold it because he wanted something smaller. He showed up one day with a used Honda and said he had made a smart trade. He hadn't sold it. It had been repossessed, or it was about to be. Can you tell me whose email is on the account? I asked. It is hayesconstructionj@gmail.com. Jason's email. And the address? It was my parents' address. Thank you, I whispered. I hung up. I sat there, the phone slippery in my sweaty palm. The truck wasn't a one-time crisis. It wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment born of desperation for a specific vehicle. They had been doing this for years. They had taken out a loan in my name 2 years ago to pay off a repossession fee or a deficiency balance on Jason's old car. They had been paying it quietly, month by month, using my credit score to clean up his mess. And they had gotten away with it. Because I trusted them. Because I was the good daughter who didn't check her credit report every month because I assumed the people who raised me weren't identity thieves. They were betting on my trust. They were betting on my stability. They treated my credit history like a communal resource, a family checking account that I just happened to not know about. The payments stopped this month because Jason was broke. He was putting everything into the down payment for the new truck, so he let the old secret loan slide, assuming he could catch up later, or maybe he just forgot. I looked at the past due notice. $212. It was such a small amount, but it represented a betrayal so vast I couldn't see the edges of it. I wasn't just a safety net. I was the host, and they were the parasites. I stood up. I grabbed the Harborstone packet. I grabbed the Brookvale letter. I grabbed my notebook. I wasn't mailing a letter this time. I drove to the house. It was raining now, a slow gray drizzle that matched the color of the sky. I parked behind my dad's truck. I walked to the door and didn't knock. I walked in. They were in the kitchen. It was lunchtime. My mother was making sandwiches. My father was reading the paper. Jason was nowhere to be seen. Likely hiding in his room or out with friends, pretending he wasn't a criminal. They looked up when I entered. The silence in the room was instant and thick. "Sarah," my mother said, her voice wavering. "We didn't think you would come." I walked to the table and laid the papers down. I fanned them out. The Harborstone forgery, the Brookvale past due notice, the police report receipt. I know. I said, my voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I know about the truck, and I know about the loan from 2 years ago. My father put down his paper. He looked at the Brookvale letter, and his face went gray. He knew. Of course he knew. "We were going to pay that off," he muttered. "We only had a few months left. You took out a loan in my name." I said, "To pay for Jason's repo." "It wasn't a repo," my mother said quickly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "It was just a balance settlement. It was $4,000. Mom, in my name, without asking me. We didn't want to worry you," she cried. "You were so busy with work. You were stressed. We handled it. We paid it every month. You never lost a dime. You stole my identity." I said, "You have been stealing it for 2 years." I looked at my father. "Dad, you drained your retirement, didn't you?" He looked up. Startled, "I saw the paperwork on the counter last time I was here." I lied, but it was a guess that felt like truth. "I saw the withdrawal slips." He slumped in his chair. He looked suddenly very old. "Jason is in trouble." "Sarah," he said, his voice raspy. "Real trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "He owes people, not just banks. He owes guys. He got involved in some online gambling thing last year. He lost a lot. Then he tried to make it back with that crypto stuff and lost more. They were threatening to garnish his wages. They were calling the house. So you bought him a $55,000 truck? I asked. He needs to look successful. My mother burst out. She was gripping the edge of the counter. If he pulls up to a job site in a beater, nobody hires him. He needs the image. Sarah, if he looks like he's doing well, he gets the contracts. Then he can pay everyone back. We just needed to get him over the hump. I looked at them. I really looked at them. They weren't evil. They were delusional. They subscribed to the magical thinking of the desperate American middle class, that if you just buy the right things, if you just project the right image of stability, the reality will eventually catch up. They believed that a new truck would transform Jason from a gambling addict with impulse control issues into a responsible contractor. They were sacrificing me on the altar of his potential, and they were ashamed. That was the core of it. They were ashamed that their son was a failure, and they were using my success to paint over the cracks in the family portrait. I sat down in the chair opposite my father. I am not going to be the solution anymore. I said, Sarah, please. My mother begged. If you press charges, if this comes out, it will destroy him. He will have a record. He won't be able to get a job anywhere. He already has a record. I said, it is just hidden in my credit file. I took a deep breath. I will offer you one thing, one lifeline. They both looked at me, hope flaring in their eyes. I will pause the investigation. I said, I will tell the detective that we are attempting to resolve this civilly first. But there are conditions. Name them. My father said. 1. Jason admits to the fraud in writing. Just for me, not for the police, but I need a signed confession so that if this happens again, I can go straight to the DA. 2. Jason surrenders the truck. He cannot afford it. He drives what he can pay for with cash. 3. We go to a nonprofit credit counseling agency, not a bank, a counselor. We sit down. We look at his debts, we look at your debts, and we make a real plan, a repayment plan, and I manage it. I see the statements, I see the progress, and he pays off the Brookvale loan immediately. My mother looked at the floor. My father looked at his hands. It is the only way. I said, we stop the lying. We stop the image maintenance. We deal with the reality. Before they could answer, the back door slammed open. Jason walked in. He was wearing a new Carhartt jacket, stiff and brown. He looked at me, then at the papers on the table. What is she doing here? He asked. She knows. Jason, my father said, she knows about Brookvale. Jason's face hardened. He walked to the fridge and grabbed a soda. He popped the tab. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. So, he said, it is getting paid, isn't it? What is the problem? The problem is that it is fraud. I said, and I am offering you a way out. I repeated the terms, the confession, the truck surrender, the counseling. Jason laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. I am not going to some shrink for my wallet. He said, and I am not giving up the truck. I have a date on Friday. What am I supposed to pick her up in? Mom's Corolla? It is about the image. I thought, it is always about the image. Jason, my father said. She filed a police report. Jason froze. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. You did what? I filed a report. I said, if you do not agree to this, the detective will be coming for you. It is out of my hands. You are bluffing. He sneered. You wouldn't do that to family. I looked him dead in the eye. Try me. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the crack, for the hesitation that had always been there before. He didn't find it. He slammed the soda can onto the counter. Foam fizzed over the rim. Go to hell. Sarah, he spat. You think you are so perfect with your little condo and your 401k. You are just a cold-hearted bitch who wants to see me fail. Keep your help. I do not need it. He stormed out of the room. The front door slammed a second later. Shaking the frame of the house, my mother burst into tears. She slumped over the counter, burying her face in the dish towel. Sarah, Please, she sobbed. Drop it. Please, just drop it. You are going to destroy this family. I stood up. I gathered my papers. I put them back in my bag. One by one. The folder snapped shut. I looked at my mother, weeping for the son who had just cursed her daughter. I looked at my father, a man who had drained his life savings to protect a lie. I didn't destroy this family, I said quietly. They looked at me. It was already destroyed. I said, I just finally saw it. I walked out. I walked to my car. The rain had stopped, leaving the world wet and gray. I got in and started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. There was nothing there for me anymore. The house I grew up in was just a building where 3 people lived in a shared hallucination. I drove away. I had the truth now. It was heavy, and it was cold, and it was lonely. But it was mine. The machinery of the financial world is slow, cold, and unsentimental. That was exactly what I needed. 2 weeks after I filed the police report and the identity theft affidavits, the tide began to turn, at least on paper. I received a notification from TransUnion that the inquiry from Granite Peak Motors had been suppressed pending investigation. A letter from Harborstone Credit arrived, stating that the loan application had been flagged as fraudulent and the account opening process, GAS, had been halted. I had stopped the bleeding. My credit score, which had dipped 40 points from the hard inquiry, ticked back up. The walls of my financial fortress were repairing themselves. But while the numbers were recovering, the human cost was compounding with an interest rate I hadn't calculated. The silence from my immediate family, my parents and Jason, was absolute. It was a heavy tactical silence, but the noise from the extended family was becoming deafening. My cousin Emily was getting engaged. We had grown up together, spending summers in kiddie pools and winters making snow forts. I had helped her write her college application essays. I had assumed I would be a bridesmaid. The engagement party was scheduled for the first Saturday in November at a banquet hall in Ridgewater. I knew the date because I had saved the Save the Date magnet on my fridge 3 months ago, but the formal invitation never came. I waited. I checked the mail every day. I told myself it got lost. I told myself the post office was unreliable. Then, 3 days before the party, I saw the photos on social media. Emily and her fiancé, smiling, holding a stack of cream-colored envelopes, so excited to celebrate with everyone this weekend. I checked the guest list on the digital event page. My name wasn't there. I clicked on the attending list. My parents were there. Jason was there. My aunts, my uncles, my second cousins from out of state. Everyone was invited except me. It wasn't an oversight. It was a sanction. I was being quarantined. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen. I felt a hot, prickling shame behind my eyes. It wasn't just that I was excluded. It was that Emily, who had nothing to do with the truck or the loan, had chosen a side. She had listened to the Whisper Network and decided I was too toxic to have around the hors d'oeuvres. I could have stayed home. I could have cried into a pillow and let them win. But I had already bought her a gift. A heavy, professional-grade stand mixer she had been eyeing for a year. It was wrapped in silver paper with a white bow. I decided I wouldn't let them make me invisible. I would go. I would drop off the gift, and I would leave. I would show them that I could be gracious even when they were petty. I dressed carefully, not flashy, but polished. A navy dress, heels, my hair blown out. I wanted to look like the stable, successful woman they resented, not the weeping victim they wanted me to be. I drove to the banquet hall. The parking lot was full. I recognized the cars. My dad's truck was there, parked crookedly near the entrance. I walked into the lobby. The party was in the Cypress Room. I could hear the bass of the DJ and the murmur of 100 voices. I walked to the check-in table. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, was manning the guest book. She looked up as I approached, her smile freezing in place like a video paused on a bad frame. "Sarah," she said. Her voice was tight. "What are you doing here?" "Hi, Aunt Carol," I said, keeping my voice level. "I know I wasn't on the list. I just wanted to drop this off for Emily." I placed the heavy box on the gift table. It sat next to a toaster and a set of towels, looking large and undeniable. "You shouldn't be here," Carol said. Stepping out from behind the table, she lowered her voice to a hiss. "Linda is inside. If she sees you, it will cause a scene." "I am not here to cause a scene," I said. "I am here to give my cousin a gift." Carol crossed her arms. She was a woman who wore floral prints and baked cookies. But right now, she looked at me with a coldness that chilled my marrow. "You know, Sarah," she said quietly, "we always knew this would happen eventually." "Knew what would happen?" I asked. "That you would turn on us." I stared at her. "Turn on you?" "Carol. They forged my signature. They tried to steal $55,000 from me." Carol shook her head, a dismissive, pitying gesture. "It is always about the money with you, isn't it? That is what Linda says. You think because you went to college and got that corporate job that you are better than everyone else. You think you are too good to help family." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Is that what you think? That I think I am better than you? You act like it," she said. "You come to dinners with your nice clothes, and your stories about vacations, and your perfect credit score. You hold it over them. You make your father feel small. And now, when they needed you, when they really needed you, you called the police. I didn't call the police because I think I'm better. I said," my voice shaking, "I called the police because they committed a crime. It is only a crime if you report it." "Sarah," she snapped. "Otherwise, it is just family helping family. But you wouldn't understand that. You are too busy protecting your assets." She turned her back on me. "You should go. Before you ruin Emily's night too." I stood there for a moment, looking at her back. I realized then that this wasn't about the truck. It wasn't about the forgery. It was about the years of silent resentment that had been building up like sediment in a pipe. They hated my stability. They hated that I had escaped the chaotic gravity of the family finances. My success wasn't a point of pride for them. It was a mirror that reflected their own struggles. And they wanted to smash it. I turned and walked out. I didn't see Emily. I didn't see my parents. I walked to my car, the sound of the party fading behind me. I drove home, feeling hollowed out. But the hollow space was quickly filled with a new, sharp question. When they really needed you. That was what Carol had said. Not when Jason wanted a truck, but when they really needed you. It implied a desperation I hadn't fully accounted for. I knew Jason was broke. I knew he was facing repo. But why were my parents so involved? Why did my father look so aged and terrified? I went back to my investigator mode. It was a defense mechanism. I knew, replacing emotion with data, but it was all I had. I sat at my computer. I pulled up the public records for Ridgewater County. I searched for my parents' property deeds. I found the original mortgage from 30 years ago. I found the refinance from 2 years ago, the one I had helped them with, and then I found something else, a notice of default. It had been filed 3 weeks ago. I stared at the PDF. Lender, Second Horizon Financial, amount past due, $4,300. I looked at the lien history. 6 months after the refinance, the one where they swore they were debt-free. They had taken out a home equity line of credit. A HELOC for $40,000. $40,000 of the equity I had helped them secure. Gone. And now they were behind on the payments. The pieces slammed together in my mind. They hadn't just used the money for Jason's lifestyle. They had used the HELOC to cover his gambling debts, his previous car failures, his legal troubles. They had drained the house to save the son. And now, the bill was due. The truck loan wasn't just about the truck. It was about cash flow. If Sarah co-signed the truck, Jason could get the loan. If Jason got the loan, maybe there was a cashback incentive. Or maybe it freed up the cash he was currently paying, or failing to pay, to someone else. Or maybe, and this thought made me sick, they were planning to use the truck as collateral for something else. They needed my signature because without it, the house of cards was going to collapse, and the literal house, their home, was going to be foreclosed on. I put my head in my hands. This was the empathy trap. If I held my ground, If I protected my credit and refused to enable them, my parents might lose their home. I would be the daughter who let her parents get evicted. But if I gave in, if I signed, or if I paid their arrears, I would be tied to them forever. I would be the permanent financial host, drained dry every time Jason made a mistake. I couldn't sleep that night. I paced my apartment. I thought about my dad teaching me to ride a bike. I thought about my mom making soup when I was sick. I thought about Aunt Carol's face, twisted with loathing. You make your father feel small. I didn't want them to be homeless. I just wanted to be safe. Monday morning. I went back to Elaine Porter. I looked terrible. My eyes were swollen. I hadn't washed my hair. Elaine didn't comment on my appearance. She just pointed to the chair. They are in default. I said, they took out a HELOC and gave the money to Jason, and now they are losing the house. That is why they were so desperate. Elaine nodded slowly. That fits the profile. Enmeshment usually ends in bankruptcy for everyone involved. I cannot let them lose the house. Elaine, I said, I can't. She took off her glasses. Sarah, you are not the one losing the house. They made the decisions. I know, I cried. I know that logically. But they are my parents. I cannot watch them get evicted because I refuse to sign a piece of paper. You refuse to be defrauded. She corrected. There is a difference. She leaned forward. If you bail them out, Sarah, you validate the theft. You teach them that if they steal from you and get caught, you will eventually panic and pay them anyway. You become the safety net that catches them every time they jump off a cliff, and they will keep jumping. So what do? I asked. Watch them burn? No, she said. You offer them a fire extinguisher, but you do not walk into the fire yourself. We spent the next hour drafting a proposal. It was clinical, precise, and devoid of emotion. I would not co-sign the truck. That was non-negotiable. I would not give cash to Jason. I would not give cash to my parents. Instead, I would pay the arrears on the HELOC directly to the bank. $4,300. A one-time payment to stop the foreclosure clock. But in exchange, there were conditions. Jason must surrender the unauthorized vehicle he was currently driving if it was tied to any debt in my name. My parents must grant me read-only access to the mortgage and HELOC accounts, so I could verify payments. They had to sign a document acknowledging the unauthorized use of my identity, not for the police, but for me, a confession. Jason had to attend financial counseling. It was a settlement offer. I asked Elaine to set up a mediation. I couldn't do it at the kitchen table again. I needed witnesses. I needed a room with a door I could walk out of. We scheduled it for Thursday at the Ridgewater Community Mediation Center. It was a neutral ground, a beige building next to the public library. I arrived early. The conference room smelled of lemon cleaner and stale carpet. There was a round table. A mediator, Mr. Evans, sat at the head. He was a soft-spoken man with a beard and a cardigan, the kind of person who radiated professional calmness. My family arrived 10 minutes late. My father looked 10 years older than he had last month. His shoulders were slumped. My mother wouldn't look at me. She clutched her purse like a shield. Jason walked in last. He looked angry. He was wearing a hat pulled low over his eyes. They sat on the opposite side of the table. Mr. Evans started with the ground rules. No interrupting, no yelling, focus on solutions. I laid the proposal on the table. I know about the HELOC. I said, and I know about the notice of default. My mother made a small, strangled sound. My father closed his eyes. I am willing to pay the $4,300 to bring the account current. I said, I will write the check to the bank today. My mother looked up, hope flooding her face. Oh, Sarah. Thank you. We knew you wouldn't, but I interrupted. There are conditions. I read them out. The transparency, the confession, the counseling. When I got to the part about the confession, Jason slammed his hand on the table. This is bullshit, he yelled. Mr. Evans raised a hand. Jason, please. She is treating family like a contract, Jason shouted, pointing a finger at me. Look at her. She is sitting there like she is our landlord. Sign this. Do that. It is humiliating. You are humiliating Dad. Sarah. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table, his face red. I am not humiliating him, I said calmly. I am offering to save his house from the mess you created. Jason, I didn't create it, Jason said. The market turned. Bad luck happens. You think you are so immune to it because you sit in your air-conditioned office all day? I looked at him. I looked at the entitlement radiating off him like heat. I am treating this like a contract, I said, because you treated me like a resource. You stole my identity. That is a transaction. Jason, you made it a business deal when you forged my signature. Family shouldn't need coercion, he screamed. Family helps because they want to. That is true, I said quietly. And families shouldn't need to steal from each other to survive. Families shouldn't need to lie to get a pickup truck. The room went silent. Jason stood up. I am not signing any confession. I am not going to some shrink. You can keep your money. He looked at Dad. Come on, Dad. Let's go. We will figure something else out. My father didn't move. Dad? Jason said. My father looked up. His eyes were watery. There is nothing else. Jason, he whispered. What? Jason asked. There is no other way. My father said, we are tapped out. The cards are maxed. The retirement is gone. He looked at me. I promised them. Sarah, he said. His voice was trembling. Promised who? I asked. The dealership, Granite Peak. I frowned. What do you mean? I told them. I told them you were coming in to sign. That is why they let Jason take the truck for the test drive weekend. That is why they held the paperwork. He took a shaky breath. I have been calling Mike in finance every day for 2 weeks, telling him you were sick, telling him you were out of town, telling him you would be there any day. I stared at him. You have been lying to them? I was buying time, he said, his voice cracking. I thought if I just stalled them and we got you over to the house, and Ray was there, you would just do it. You would see how much it meant to us, and you would just do it. He put his face in his hands. I just wanted him to have the truck. Sarah, I just wanted one thing to go right for him. He looked so small. He wasn't the strong father who had carried me on his shoulders. He was a broken man who had lied to a bank, lied to his daughter, and lied to himself, all to prop up a son who refused to stand on his own. He looked at Jason. We have to take the deal. Son, we are going to lose the house. Jason looked at Dad, then at me. The anger on his face flickered, replaced for a second by fear, but then the pride rushed back in to cover it. No, he said, I am not letting her win. He turned and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence in the room was heavy. Mr. Evans cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a pause, he suggested gently. I stood up. My legs felt shaky. The offer stands until 5 p.m. I said to my parents. I left the document on the table. I walked out. I walked past the library, past the coffee shop, to my car. I felt hollow. There was no triumph in seeing my father broken. There was no joy in watching my brother storm out. But as I unlocked my car door, I realized something else. I was free. For the first time in my life, I hadn't fixed it. I hadn't chased Jason into the parking lot to beg him to come back. I hadn't softened the terms to make my dad stop crying. I had offered a lifeline, and they had to decide whether to grab it. I sat in the driver's seat. I checked my phone. No messages. I knew this wasn't over. Jason wouldn't let it end like this. He was cornered, humiliated, and broke. A man like that doesn't retreat. He lashes out. I started the car. I had the police report. I had the credit freeze. I had the lawyer. I was ready for the last blow. I drove away from the mediation center, leaving the offer on the table, knowing that whatever happened next, I had finally chosen myself. And strangely, despite the grief, the air in the car felt cleaner than it had in years. The letter from Harborstone Credit arrived on a Tuesday, 3 days after the mediation had failed. It was thin, precise, and devastatingly final. Dear Ms. Hayes, following our internal investigation and a review of the affidavit of forgery provided by your legal counsel, We have determined that the signature on the co-signer agreement dated October 14th does not match the specimen provided. Consequently, we have classified this application as fraudulent. The loan request has been denied, and all inquiries associated with this application will be removed from your credit file. I read it twice. The relief wasn't a shout. It was a long, slow exhale. The mechanism of the trap had been dismantled. I was safe. But in the world of finance, physics applies. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. My safety meant Jason's ruin, without the loan. The deal with Granite Peak Motors collapsed because my father had stalled them for weeks with promises of my imminent signature. The dealership was out of patience. They demanded the immediate return of the truck. I didn't see it happen, but I heard about it. In a small town like ours, humiliation travels faster than light. Jason had to drive the midnight black, lifted, leather interior pickup back to the lot. He had to hand the keys to Mike in finance, the same Mike he had likely bragged to about his big contracts and his supportive family. He had to wait for his ride to pick him up. And the ride wasn't my parents'. Their car was in the shop, a casualty of deferred maintenance. Jason had to call a friend. That afternoon, the public retaliation began. It started with a text from my mother. "I hope you are satisfied. You just humiliated your brother in front of the whole town. He is devastated. We are all devastated. You have a heart of stone." I didn't reply. I archived the message. Then came Jason. He didn't text me directly. He went to the court of public opinion. He posted a photo on social media. It was a black screen with white text, the digital equivalent of a scream. It is funny how the people who have the most are the ones who will do the least to help you. I lost my truck today, not because I could not pay for it, but because of sabotage. Some people would rather see family fail than lift a finger to help. Jealousy is a disease. Get well soon. The comments section filled up quickly. "Stay strong, brother." One friend wrote, "Karma never misses." Another added, "Wow, that is cold. Family should come first." A cousin commented. I sat in my living room, watching the notifications roll in. I felt the old urge to defend myself. I wanted to post the letter from Harborstone. I wanted to post the police report number. I wanted to say, "He forged my signature. He stole my identity." But I remembered Elaine's advice. Do not wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty. And the pig likes it. I typed one response. I didn't post it on his wall. I posted it on my own timeline, visible only to mutual friends and family. I will not discuss private family matters on social media. There are two sides to every story, and the truth is documented in legal records. If anyone has genuine questions about my character or my actions, I encourage you to ask me directly. It was calm. It was boring. It was the adult in the room. And nobody asked. Not one of the people liking Jason's post messaged me to ask what happened. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the villain. It was easier to believe that Sarah was the stuck-up, selfish sister than to accept that the Hayes family was built on a foundation of fraud. The silence from the extended family deepened. I was uninvited from Sunday dinners I hadn't attended in years. I was removed from group chats. Then came the memorial brunch. It was for my great-aunt Margie, who had passed away 2 months ago. The family had delayed the gathering to accommodate an uncle flying in from overseas. It was being held at the Ridgewater Community Center, a large, echoing hall with fluorescent lights and fold-out tables. I debated not going. My stomach churned at the thought of walking into that room, but avoiding it felt like an admission of guilt. If I hid? I confirmed their narrative. If I showed up, I was declaring that I had nothing to be ashamed of. I called Elaine. "I have to go to this thing on Saturday." I said, "I do not want to go alone, and I do not want to bring a date, because I do not want to subject an innocent civilian to this. I will come." Elaine said immediately, "You are my lawyer." Elaine, "That is weird. I am also your friend," she said, "and frankly, I want to see this dynamic in the wild. I will bring the file, just in case." We arrived at 11 o'clock. The parking lot was full. I saw my dad's truck, the old one, parked near the entrance. I took a deep breath. Elaine patted my arm. "Chin up," she said. "You are the plaintiff, remember? Not the defendant." We walked in. The room smelled of coffee, bacon, and old perfume. There were about 50 people there. My cousins were clustered by the buffet. My aunts were sitting at round tables with white tablecloths. When I walked in, the chatter didn't stop, but the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Whispers were exchanged behind cupped hands. I walked to the gift table and placed a card for Margie's daughter. Then I went to the coffee station. I felt a presence behind me before I heard the voice. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here." I turned around. It was my mother. She was wearing her black Sunday dress. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set in hard, angry lines. Beside her stood Aunt Carol and my cousin Emily. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I came to pay my respects to Margie." "Respect?" she scoffed. The word sounded wet and heavy. "You do not know the meaning of the word. You treat strangers better than your own blood." People were watching. The conversation at the nearest table had died. "Mom." "Let's not do this here," I said quietly. "Oh, we are doing this," she said, her voice rising. "You think you can just ruin your brother's life, destroy his reputation, and then waltz in here and drink coffee like nothing happened?" "I didn't ruin his reputation," I said. "You called the police on him," she shouted. The sound echoed off the linoleum floors. The entire room went silent. 50 people stopped chewing. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto us. My mother was crying now, the tears flowing freely. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are abandoning this family. Sarah, you have always thought you were too good for us, and now you are trying to put your own brother in jail just to save a few dollars? You are selfish. You are cruel." She was playing to the gallery. She was the grieving mother, the martyr, and I was the monster. I looked around the room. I saw Jason standing by the back wall, arms crossed, watching with a smirk. He was enjoying this. He was letting her fight his battle. I looked at my father, sitting at a table, staring into his coffee cup, shrinking into himself. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. I put my coffee cup down on the table. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I turned to my mother. "Did you use my identity without my permission?" I asked. My voice was clear. It carried to the back of the room. My mother blinked. "What?" "It is a simple question," I said, keeping my volume steady. "Did you and Jason use my social security number, my employment history, and a forged signature to apply for a $55,000 loan without my consent? Yes or no?" She froze. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a flash of panic. We were going to tell you," she stammered. "Yes or no?" I repeated. She looked around the room, searching for support. She looked at Carol. She looked at Jason. "Sarah, it is complicated," she yelled. "It is not complicated," I said. "It is fraud." I motioned to Elaine. Elaine stepped forward. She wasn't aggressive. She just looked like what she was, a competent professional. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thin stack of papers. I took them from her. I held them up. "This is the affidavit from Harborstone Credit," I said, addressing the room. "It confirms that the signature on the loan application was a forgery." I turned the page. "This is the police report filed 3 weeks ago." I turned the page again. "And this is the record of a $4,000 personal loan taken out in my name 2 years ago to pay for Jason's previous debts. A loan I knew nothing about until I received a collections notice last week." I looked at my Aunt Carol, who was standing with her mouth slightly open. I looked at my cousin Emily. "I am not abandoning the family," I said. "I am protecting myself from it. There is a difference." The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. The narrative they had built, the story of Sarah the snob, Sarah the traitor, was crumbling under the weight of the paper in my hand. My mother looked devastated, not because of what she had done, but because the image had broken. The veil of nice struggling family had been ripped away, exposing the rot underneath. I looked at Jason. He wasn't smirking anymore. He looked trapped. "Jason," I said. He pushed off the wall. "Do not talk to me. I am offering you a deal." I said. He stopped. "A deal?" I walked toward him. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. "I have enough evidence right here to ensure you are charged with identity theft and wire fraud. The detective is waiting for my call to proceed." Jason swallowed hard. "But I do not want to ruin your life." I said. "I just want my life back." I held out a single sheet of paper. "This is a confession." I said. "It states that you used my identity without permission. It states that you agree to repay the unauthorized debts, and it states that you will attend 6 months of financial counseling." "I do not need counseling," he muttered. "You do," I said. "If you sign this, and if you attend the counseling, and if you start paying me back for the Brookvale loan, I will ask the district attorney to defer charges. I will not pursue maximum damages." I looked at him, my eyes burning. "But if you walk out of here today without signing this, I will let the legal system handle it, and they will not offer you counseling. They will offer you a cell." Jason looked at the paper. He looked at his mother, who was sobbing quietly now. He looked at his father, who still hadn't looked up. The room waited. The air was so still I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Jason's face turned a mottled red. He clenched his fists. "You are such a bitch," he whispered. "Sign it," I said. He snatched the paper from my hand. He grabbed a pen from the guest book table. He scribbled his name, the pen tearing through the paper. "I did what I had to do," he shouted. Throwing the pen down, it clattered across the floor. "I did what I had to do to survive. You wouldn't understand that because you have had everything handed to you." He looked around the room, daring anyone to contradict him. "I was trying to build something," he yelled. "That was it. The confession. I did what I had to do." He hadn't denied it. He had justified it. He admitted it. My cousin Emily whispered. Jason heard her. He flinched as if he had been slapped. He looked at me with pure hatred. "Are you happy?" he spat. "No. Jason," I said softly. "I am not happy. I am heartbroken." He turned and stormed out of the exit. The metal bar of the door crashed loudly as he left. I stood there, the signed paper in my hand. My mother walked over to me. She looked small. She looked old. "How could you?" she whispered. "In front of everyone? How could you?" I asked back. "Behind my back?" She didn't answer. She turned away, walking toward the table where my father sat. She put her hand on his shoulder. He didn't move. The room began to fracture. Some people, Aunt Carol, a few older uncles, turned their backs on me, muttering about dirty laundry and disgrace. They would never forgive me for popping the bubble. They preferred the polite lie to the ugly truth. But others, Emily, my Aunt Sarah, who I was named after, and a few cousins, looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Emily walked up to me. I didn't know. She said quietly, "Sarah, I honestly didn't know." "I know," I said. "They are good storytellers." I handed the folder to Elaine. She tucked it into her bag. "We should go," Elaine said. "You got what you came for." I nodded. I walked out of the community center. The air outside was cold and crisp. The sun was shining, bright and indifferent to the drama that had just played out. I walked to my car. My hands were shaking. I unlocked the door and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won a battle. I felt a profound, aching sense of loss. I had cleared my name. I had protected my credit. I had forced the truth into the light. But I had lost my family. The image of my father sitting there, unable to look at me, burned in my mind. The sound of my mother's weeping would stay with me for a long time. But then I thought about the signature on the confession. Jason Hayes. I thought about the future. I thought about the house I was going to buy. I thought about the silence in my apartment that would no longer be filled with anxiety about what they were doing with my name. I took out my phone. I opened my contacts. I selected Mom. Block contact. I selected Dad. Block contact. I selected Jason, block contact. I didn't do it in anger. I did it with the slow, deliberate movements of a surgeon closing a wound. It was necessary. It was the only way to heal. I started the car. I looked at the rearview mirror. I saw the community center getting smaller as I drove away. The silence I was driving into wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a promise. It was the sound of a life that finally, fully, belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to Sarah's story. It is a heavy one, but I know it is a reality for so many people who have to choose between their own survival and the demands of their families. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary with a family member over money? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more realistic, emotional dramas about justice and resilience, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. Your support helps us keep writing. Take care of yourselves. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can say is no.